Today, I'm going to be surviving realistic Minecraft summer. While at first I thought this would be an easy, smooth sailing episode, I quickly found out how wrong I was. Upon loading into the world, I began to collect some rocks and sticks off the ground in order to create some basic tools. Once I had some simple supplies, I started looking for a place to build my home. I knew I wanted somewhere near a river for its clean drinking water, and that's when I found this little spot near the forest. I used the rocks I gathered earlier to make an axe and began chopping down some trees. I then cleared a small area and built a fire, which would allow me to start cooking food. As the night fell, I began to mold my clay into some useful items that will help me once I get copper. Once I had my molds, I made a hole where I could cook and harden them for use in the future. After gathering some food throughout the night, I returned home and began cooking the meat, hoping it would allow it to last longer before expiring. While waiting for some of the horse meat to cook, I decided I'd make a pan and try to find some copper in a nearby river. After spending way too long trying to figure out how this pan worked, I found some silver and began extracting it from the riverbed. Unfortunately, I found out later that this was useless. Once I had 10 pieces of silver, I returned home and began to melt it. This is when I found out it was useless since I couldn't make tools with it. You may notice some new features from here on out. While playing, I realized I was missing some mods that I wanted in. The first one you'll see here is the cold sweat mod. This mod adds a temperature feature that I need to pay attention to or else I may freeze or overheat. At first, this doesn't affect much, but once winter comes, staying warm will be a struggle. I also decided to add the Weather 2 mod, which most definitely changed the direction of this video. At first, I thought the weather would only play a minor role, however, you'll see soon just how much it affects the video. As I began to freeze, I quickly realized that I was going to want shelter. I left my little campsite looking for copper-rich rocks that I could make into tools. The most important tool I needed right away was a saw. The saw would allow me to cut logs into lumber, which would allow me to build a home much easier. While searching for copper, I found a sleeping animal. Upon further inspection, I found it to be a saber-toothed tiger. I also noticed a grow timer, which made me believe this saber-tooth was still a baby, and that if I attacked it, it would hopefully get scared and run away. After attacking the saber-tooth, I quickly found out that it wasn't one to back down. I then fought and killed the beast, without dying at all, of course. After returning home from an unsuccessful copper expedition, I started my fire and began to cook the food I found. While I didn't get much copper, I was able to find plenty of food, which is also a win. Knowing the importance of shelter in this mod pack, I set back out on the lookout for copper. While out, I found a beach, which looked very strange but was overall kinda useless. Luckily, I found some small copper rocks lying around. I picked them up and left a mound of dirt so I could come back later and start a mine. After gathering around 12 rocks, I returned home and began cooking the riches of my adventure. I started by cooking the food on the fire. While preparing my food, I learned that the fire pit doesn't produce heat. I started to freeze to death, but I quickly set the nearby ground on fire, which allowed me to start warming up. As the day rose, I made my way back down to the river and started making some mud. I was able to mix this mud with straw to make mud bricks, which, once dried, can be turned into mud brick blocks. I then returned back to my camp and laid the wet bricks in the sun. I then decided now would probably be a good time to smelt down my copper to make tools. Once my copper was done, I poured it into a pickaxe mold. I could later use this pickaxe to mine more copper. As the night fell, it began to rain, which caused me to get cold. In order to prevent myself from freezing, I started a fire to keep warm. I also noticed the clouds near me were looking a little strange. I continued watching as the clouds spun in circles. I waited for a tornado to start, but because I was so new to the weather mod, I just assumed that's how the clouds looked while it was storming. However, as the rain fell harder, I realized I was being pulled into my fire, which should have been obvious that I needed to leave, but I was being stubborn and I thought I would be safe. This is when I looked up and saw the funnel right next to me. At this point, it was too late. I was being pulled against the blocks next to me and I couldn't run. As the tornado touched down, I was being pulled into the air and began to fly around the funnel. I was taken higher and higher into the air, where I began to freeze. Knowing that falling from this height would be fatal, I looked at my map in order to know what direction the nearby river was. This was unfortunately not needed since I froze to death before falling. I was convinced that I just lost all my items, conveniently right after making my pickaxe. I respawned and began to head back to the area where I died, hoping the tornado wasn't holding onto my items and they fell to the ground with my body. As I made my way over, I had to pay attention to the tornado to be sure it wasn't getting too close. As I arrived at my death point, I was relieved to see a few of my items lying around. This gave me hope to look around more to find the rest. I was lucky to get my pickaxe back, meaning I didn't lose nearly as much progress as I thought I did. After the tornado went on its own way, I decided I needed to get more tools as soon as possible. So I went out looking for more copper, making sure to leave markings wherever I found some. After returning home, I saw that my mud bricks were dried. I picked up the bricks knowing I would need them for my house. I then started to cook some food as I got ready to smelt my copper down. I was finally able to finish making my copper tools. I made a saw, an axe, a prospector pick, and a hammer. With all of these, I will be able to find and smelt more ores. Now that I have my saw, I can finally start making my house. I started by making a chest to clear my inventory to make things easier as I built. I then cleared a spot and began to place the starting blocks of my home. After building the general shape of the house, I decided I wanted a fireplace in the corner. I filled the corner with mud bricks to prevent the fire from spreading, and then I got started on the wooden floor. Once all 4 walls were up, I started working on the roof using a mix of stone and wooden stairs. After building my house, I moved my attention to making a bed. I used a knife on some of my sheep hide to get wool, which I could use at a loom to make string. After making a spittle and loom, I made some yarn and began turning it into cloth. Once I had 3 cloths, I made myself a cozy bed. After making my bed, I set out to explore the land around me and to get more food for the winter. As I was gathering some wild crops, I noticed it started to get windy. I then looked at the clouds where I saw another tornado starting to form. Lucky for me, this new tornado wasn't too close to me, so I knew I didn't have to worry. I continued gathering crops waiting for the funnel to form. I then realized how close the tornado was forming to me. I quickly killed a nearby duck and ran off to avoid certain death. After avoiding the tornado and finishing my adventure, I returned home and threw my food in large vessels, allowing them to stay fresh longer. I then set out to make my copper mine in the nearby birch forest. I started by digging a massive hole in the ground, then I used support beams to prevent cave-ins as I dug under the rock. Once I gathered a decent amount of copper, I dropped it off in my chest and began to make a charcoal pit. I still don't know what I'll need charcoal for, but I thought it would be smart to at least have some ready. I then threw some water in a barrel with a few logs to prepare animal hides to make leather. On my way back up to my house from gathering water, I glanced to my left and saw another tornado forming. I then came to the conclusion that I was living in Tornado Alley. I quickly threw logs in the barrel and sealed it so it would start processing as I hunkered down in my home. I thought it'd be fun to watch the tornado start to form before hiding, so I watched as the tornado began to touch the ground before I hid inside. I then went back out to see how close the tornado was when I saw the funnel had started to go back up into the clouds before touching the ground again. While I was inside, I realized I was getting really cold, so I threw the logs in the corner and started a fire to stay warm. I then checked on the tornado again and saw it was now across the river and no longer touching the ground, meaning it was no longer a threat to me. After a good night's rest, I took a peek in my barrel and saw my leather was ready. The reason I wanted leather was because winter would be coming sooner than later, and I knew if I wanted to stay warm, I would need some warm clothing. I made a full set of leather armor and moved to the next project. During my testing world, I made copper tools before making this world. After doing a little research, I found that the next upgrade would be bronze tools, so I gathered some copper and tin, put it into a vessel, and started smelting. Once I had my liquid bronze, I made an axe and a pickaxe. While gathering some supplies to prepare for the winter, I looked up at the sky and would you look at that? Another tornado was trying to say hello before the summer ends. I watched as the funnel slowly formed to try and see if I needed to be worried at all. I was also waiting for my kilt to finish burning since I had ore smelting, and if I waited too long to pour them, it would harden and I'd have to resmelt them. I watched as the tornado touched down quite a far away, so I assumed I'd be safe. Once my ores were finished smelting, I grabbed my vessel just to figure out that I messed up the tin to copper ratio and I couldn't pour it. I then went to sleep, hoping that I could just ignore the tornado. However, when I woke up, I saw it was getting closer. So close that it was trying to pull me out of my doorway. I then decided to watch the tornado as I got closer and closer to my house. At this time I thought I'd be safe inside, hoping that the tornado couldn't pull me through the blocks. I then started to cook some clay pots inside to help pass the time. Remember earlier when I said I used mud bricks so the fire wouldn't spread? Yeah, I was wrong. Now I had to make sure I watched the fire for the full 8 minutes it takes for the kilt to burn. I even tried to put out the fire, but I didn't realize that once the kilt started, you cannot stop it. I spent the rest of the time preparing for winter. I collected plenty of logs and started to dry out some more bricks in order to fix my fireplace so I don't burn my house down in the middle of winter. And that wraps up the summer. With the arrival of September 1st, early autumn has come. Over the next few months, I will need to prepare for the winter, since food will be scarce and the resources will be hard to come by. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you would like to see this world continue, let me know in the comments below. I will see you all next time.